and that sometimes her temper would explode and she'd completely lose control. You heard from multiple witnesses that Miss Heard can be very pleasant, even charming. But you also heard from multiple witnesses and in audio recordings of Miss Heard that she can be incredibly aggressive, violent, and cruel. You heard that even from her former assistant, Kate James, Miss James testified that Miss Heard would scream, yell, and send her barrages of text messages. In fact, Miss Heard testified that Miss James testified that Miss Heard literally spat in her face. You heard from Miss Heard's former best friend, Rocky Pennington, that Miss Heard once hit her when Miss Pennington did not do her best to meet Miss Heard's needs. You also heard from Beverly Leonard that she once witnessed Miss Heard assault her then partner in Seattle Airport in 2009. And you heard from Mr. Depp that Miss Heard used her sister Whitney as a punching bag, literally and figuratively. You also heard overwhelming evidence from Mr. Depp and the people that were around him and Miss Heard during their relationship, that Mr. Depp suffered persistent verbal and physical abuse at the hands of Miss Heard. You've heard evidence from Dr. Curry and the fact witnesses at this trial that Miss Heard's deepest fear is one of abandonment, being left by Mr. Depp. Mr. Depp's greatest crime in her mind, the fault she confronts him with time and time again, is that he splits. He leaves the fight, especially when Miss Heard gets physical, and she couldn't stand it when he did. You heard from Miss Heard yourselves in audio recordings how upsetting it was to her when Mr. Depp would split.
Anytime anything goes wrong, you split. I feel like it's your first thing. And it's unnecessary. It's not always you're splitting because there's blows or because there's yelling or anything. You split most times when I'm still speaking in this volume and nothing has been thrown or hit or anything.
You saw the barrage of text messages she would send when he would leave, calling him a monster for doing so. You heard from witnesses like Travis McGivern, Tara Roberts, and Debbie Lloyd that Miss Heard would claw at Mr. Depp, block the elevator, throw a punch when Mr. Depp tried to separate himself from the fight. And you heard from Mr. Depp and Miss Heard's couple therapist, Dr. Anderson, that Miss Heard reported that when Mr. Depp would leave to de-escalate a fight, she would strike him to keep him there because she would rather be in a fight than have him leave. You heard from Mr. Depp about how often Miss Heard would berate him, insult him, and physically attack him, including one of the most serious occasions when Miss Heard threw a vodka bottle at Mr. Depp, severely injuring his finger, and then put a cigarette out on his face. You heard from Mr. Depp that this whole incident in Australia started because Miss Heard was enraged that Mr. Depp wanted a post-nuptial agreement, and she wasn't in his will, just a month after getting married. When her husband was seriously injured and bleeding from a partially amputated finger, what did Miss Heard do? She pursued him. She kept coming after him because that's what she does. She wouldn't stop.
It's just to get out of a bad situation that's happening before it gets worse. In Australia, when we had the big fight where I lost the tip of my finger,
So.
at least
Du hast bestimmt gehört, wie ich 500.
5 bathrooms and 2 bedrooms I went to
avoid talking to me, to
To
avoid
escape
working it
the-
out. That's
to
the
escape
problem.
the fight.
You don't escape the fight. You escape the solution.
No.
You escape the solution.
No.
You escape figuring it out. We cannot work it out if you run away.
しょうがない。
チャンピオン撃破。報告。新しいキルリーダーが生まれました。報告。新しいキルリーダーが生まれました。
リング閉鎖まで残り1分。よかったわ。リングは遠くない。リング閉鎖まで残り45秒。近い。楽勝だわ。閉鎖まで残り30秒。残り10秒。
警告。リング閉鎖中。新しいキルリーダーが確定しました。
部隊の半分が消えた。いける。
ケアパッケージ輸送中。
Australia when we had the big fight where I lost the tip of my finger. At least 5 bathrooms and 2 bedrooms I went to
avoid talking to me, to
To
avoid
escape
working it
the-
out. That's
to
the
escape
problem.
the fight.
You don't escape the fight. You escape the solution.
No.
You escape the solution.
No.
You escape figuring it out. We cannot work it out if you run away to the bathroom every time.
You heard Mr. Depp testify he went through something like a nervous breakdown that day, and he wrote a lot of things on mirrors and other places. Again, what did Miss Heard do as her husband was bleeding from serious injury? She wrote snarky messages right back to him. She denied it under oath to you, but the evidence you saw speaks for itself. You heard from Mr. Depp's security, Sean Bett, who was aware of constant arguing and bickering. He witnessed Miss Heard calling Mr. Depp names. Fat ass. Fuck you, Johnny. Mr. Bett testified that he saw and documented injuries on Mr. Depp. A swollen eyelid in March of 2015, cuts on his nose, scratch marks on his chin in December of 2015. And you heard from Travis McGivern, who testified that Miss Heard called Mr. Depp names like washed up, fucking cunt, and worst of all, a fucking deadbeat dad. Miss Heard would take the low blows and hit him where it hurts, his children. Mr. McGivern told you that on March 23rd, 2015, Miss Heard threw things at Mr. Depp, spat at him, and ultimately punched him in the face, leaving him with a shiner. You heard testimony from Malcolm Connolly, another security member, who testified he saw Miss Heard throw things at Mr. Depp, a cigarette lighter on a plane, a soda can from upstairs at the Eastern Columbia building. He never saw marks on Miss Heard, but he saw marks on Mr. Depp, scratches, bruises on his left eye, scratches on his left ear. And he took pictures documenting injuries like this one. You also heard from Tara Roberts, a manager at Mr. Depp's Island, who witnessed Miss Heard telling Mr. Depp that he was washed up and would die fat and lonely. You also heard from Miss Roberts that she witnessed Miss Heard clawing and grabbing at Mr. Depp, grabbing his hair, trying to pull him back to her, and Mr. Depp had a visible injury to his nose on that occasion. Most importantly, you heard from Miss Heard yourselves on multiple audio recordings, admitting to being physically violent with Mr. Depp. You heard Miss Heard admit to hitting Mr. Depp.
And then you fucking clown.
I remember hitting you as a response to the door thing. And I'm really sorry about hitting you at the door or hitting your head. I did not mean to, nor.
You didn't mean to hit me in the head with the door, but you meant to
I didn't
punch me in the jaw.
I meant to hit you, and I did not do this thing with the door. I do remember I did mean to hit you with the
That you didn't mean.
The door? No, God, no, I didn't.
But punching me in the jaw.
I didn't. Okay, I'm sorry I hit you. I did mean to hit you, but it was in response. I just reacted in response to my foot. I just reacted.
You heard her admit it again and claim Mr. Depp was a baby for complaining about the abuse.
And I watched you lie, and then
I didn't punch you, by the way. I'm sorry that I didn't hit you across the face in a proper slap, but I was hitting you. It was not punching you. Babe, you're not punched.
Don't tell me what it feels like to be punched.
You know, you've been in a lot of fights. You've been around a long time. I know. Yeah.
No, when you fucking have a close
You
face.
didn't get punched. You got hit. I'm sorry I hit you like this, but I did not punch you. I did not fucking deck you. I fucking was hitting you. I don't know what the motion of my actual hand was, but you're fine. I did not hurt you. I did not punch you. I was hitting you.
How are you?
What am I supposed to do? Do this? I'm not sitting here bitching about it, am I? You are. That's the difference between me and you. You're a fucking baby. You are such a baby. Grow the fuck up, Johnny.
Physical fights?
I did start a physical
Yeah,
fight.
you did, so I had to
Because-
get the fuck out of there.
Yes, you did. So you did the right thing, the big thing. You know what? You're admirable.
Take a minute to really think about what you just heard there. Quote, I'm sorry that I didn't hit you across the face in a proper slap, but I was hitting you. I was not punching you. Babe, you're not punched. Imagine that was Mr. Depp saying that to Miss Heard on that recording. Let's play one more.
Oh,
That is
such
quite a
good
point.
argument.
Ooh, this one.
That fake laugh is too much to take.
I'm not gonna laugh.
This is the audio that really freaked me out the most.
So disgusting.
Yeah.
I'm sure she's training.
I'm not ready for the laugh this morning.
No, no, you're right. I don't. It's all
No, I'm right. I don't regret. I don't regret.
Oh, what else?
I don't
What else
regret.
that you do? Oh, come on.
I don't
Please.
regret. No, I
Come
don't
on.
regret.
Lay it on me. What else? What else other things you want to add?
Can't talk
You
to me
fucking
so
lying piece of
positive,
shit. What?
right?
Oh,
Dirty
no. I
kid
want to
show.
know. I want
Get out of your Uber job.
Run away. Go get it.
Yeah,
Wait, is there no other place for you to run in your 15 other houses to go run? Come on, go be a real married man. Go deal with your shit the way that a man does. Go run to the next house. Every man does.
Yeah.
Go. Run away.
This is the real Miss Heard,
Holy shit.
the one in the audio recordings, not the one you saw in this courtroom. What you didn't hear on a single recording you heard in this case, and there were many played by both parties, is Mr. Depp ever admitting to hitting, punching, or kicking Miss Heard. You didn't hear it. It doesn't exist. It didn't happen. And despite the fact that Mr. Depp and Miss Heard are heard discussing many of the alleged incidents you've heard about at this trial, like Australia and the Bahamas, you never heard Miss Heard accuse Mr. Depp of sexual assault. Unlike Mr. Depp, who you heard admit to and own up to his past mistakes and his struggles, particularly with drugs and alcohol, Ms. Heard will not admit that she has ever done anything wrong. But she cannot deny what you heard on those recordings. As much as Ms. Heard and her lawyers have tried to make this case about Mr. Depp's language, it is Ms. Heard that repeatedly admits to violence. By April and May of 2016, Mr. Depp had reached his limit. His mother was dying. His finances were a mess. And when he showed up late to Ms. Heard's 30th birthday party, because a meeting with his new business manager, Edward White, had gone late, Ms. Heard, of course, was not understanding. She was furious. You heard from Mr. Depp, both in this courtroom and on audio recordings, that Ms. Heard punched him that evening. He left with Travis McGivern, and the next morning he learned that someone had left feces on his bed. Ms. Heard denies responsibility, but she admitted to the prank to Starling Jenkins. You heard him testify to that effect. For almost a month after that, they didn't see each other. And you heard from Mr. Depp that when his mother died on May 20th, 2016, he resolved to leave Ms. Heard. He was done. And when Ms. Heard learned that Mr. Depp was done, that she was really losing him, she went on the attack. She filed for divorce before Mr. Depp could. Then, as you heard from Mr. Depp's divorce lawyer, Laura Wasser, Ms. Heard sent a letter demanding financial support. And when her demands weren't met, Ms. Heard struck a blow against Mr. Depp that was more damaging than any physical blow she had ever landed. When she walked into court 6 years ago today, on May 27th, 2016, to get a domestic violence restraining order against Mr. Depp, she did so in front of paparazzi with a mark on her face. The evidence presented at this trial demonstrates that Ms. Heard didn't just want a divorce. She wanted to ruin him. Ms. Heard denied alerting TMZ to the TRO filing in this courtroom. But you heard testimony from Morgan Tremaine that TMZ knew to go to the courthouse, knew what side of her face the alleged bruise was on, and that Ms. Heard would pause. She would pause for paparazzi, who got the photos that ended up splashed across newspapers and magazines. Ms. Heard testified that she did not personally give photographs of her apparent injuries to People magazine, but somehow these pictures that she took and maintained on her devices ended up on the cover of People magazine 1 month later. In the end, she walked away with $7 million without any tax liabilities, which she said she was donating to 2 charities, the ACLU and the Children's Hospital of Los Angeles. The ACLU, they got less than $1 million from her. And the Children's Hospital, they got $250,000. But that didn't stop Ms. Heard from telling the world that she donated everything, because remember, she wanted nothing. And she had donated everything. The word donated. And that didn't stop her from testifying under the penalty of perjury that she had donated it. Ms. Heard tried to tell you that pledge and donate mean the same thing. She claims she hasn't given the money because she was sued, but you've heard uncontested evidence that she had the money for 13 months prior to this lawsuit being commenced by Mr. Depp. She had all the money and had month after month after month to fulfill her pledge and actually donate the money. But she didn't. She also told you that she never fulfilled the pledge because Mr. Depp sued her for defamation. That's a blatant lie. It was Ms. Heard who fired the first shot after the divorce was finalized, when she sought to initiate an arbitration against Mr. Depp for defamation 3 months before the op-ed was even published, and 6 months before Mr. Depp filed this lawsuit. Not only does this contradict Ms. Heard's excuse for not making donations, it contradicts her narrative that she just wants to move on with her life, that she just wants Mr. Depp to leave her alone. Lies. That is Ms. Heard's narrative. Lies upon lies.
And actually were all kinds of accusations flying your way when you said all this, and then there was a divorce settlement. You got $7 million.
I think.
People were saying this is all about the money, but then you did something that twisted that whole argument. What did you do with that money?
$7 million in total was donated to, I split it between the ACLU and Children's Hospital of Los Angeles.
ACLU is a human rights organization.
Sorry, ACLU is a prominent organization, nonprofit organization in the United States. Yeah. It's called the American Civil Liberties Union, and they work on behalf of marginalized communities on the ground and in legislative reform.
Right.
And
well, more power to you, because that's something that I've never heard
I wanted
of.
nothing.
Mm-hmm.
When you catch Ms. Heard in a lie, she tries to cover it up with more lies. So let's talk about the giant lie at the heart of this case. Ms. Heard's claim that Mr. Depp is an abusive monster and that she is a public figure representing domestic abuse. At the start of this case, Mr. Chu and I told you that you were going to hear some disturbing and graphic tales of abuse from Ms. Heard, and they were designed to shock you and overwhelm you, which you have. We told you that this would be a performance, the role of her lifetime, as a heroic survivor of brutal abuse. When Mr. Depp brought this case for defamation, Ms. Heard went all in. She spun a story of shocking, overwhelming, brutal abuse. She came into this courtroom prepared to give the performance of her life, and she gave it. Ms. Heard's acting coach, Christina Sexton, testified that Ms. Heard has difficulty crying when she is acting.
Boom. Boom.
You saw it. Yep. Ms. Heard sobbing without tears, while spinning elaborate, exaggerated, fantastical accounts of abuse and everything going on in her mind almost a decade prior while enduring that abuse. It was a performance. She told you that what she thinks about, she told you what she thinks you need to hear to convict this man as a domestic abuser and a rapist. She wants you to believe that she was abused countless times. Countless times over the entire course of their relationship.
Hey, Nate, can you
But as
unmute
Mr. Chu
yourself?
and I
I'll adjust
promised
your
you,
volume.
the evidence just does not bear that out. Ms. Heard has told you that she has mountains of
Thanks,
evidence of abuse, but there are no medical records reflecting she sustained any injuries from the abuse she claims. Ms. Heard had medical professionals at her disposal. Dr. Kipper, Debbie Lloyd, her own nurse, Erin Filati, and yet there's nothing.
Camille is killing it.
Ms. Heard took pictures all the time. Pictures of Mr. Depp sleeping. Pictures of cocaine. Pictures of property damage.
This is really smart.
Pictures of herself. And as an actress, she was photographed all the time. Where are the pictures of the horrific injuries Ms. Heard describes? Ms. Heard also took audio recordings and videos frequently. Where are the videos of Mr. Depp attacking her? Where are the audio recordings of Mr. Depp admitting to or apologizing for physical abuse? There are none. What Ms. Heard has, and what you've seen multiple times, is a video of Mr. Depp banging some cabinets around in a kitchen. A video that, based on the testimony you heard from Morgan Tremaine, the former TMZ employee, Ms. Heard seems to have sold to TMZ right before she was deposed in connection with her divorce from Mr. Depp. Sure, Ms. Heard can point to text messages where Mr. Depp is apologizing to her, but never for violence. Ms. Heard's counsel showed you Defendant's Exhibit 325, where Mr. Depp says sorry for, quote, my behavior. I'm a fucking savage. But this is not an apology for physical violence. It's an apology for the, quote, these heinous, slinging insults. Mr. Depp is apologizing for the words he used. Unlike Ms. Heard, who you heard apologizing for physical violence in multiple audio recordings, you have never heard that from Mr. Depp because he never used physical violence against Ms. Heard. Ms. Heard told you that Mr. Depp started abusing her right from the very beginning of her relationship, starting at the beginning of 2012. But she has repeatedly testified under oath differently to having spent a year of bliss with Mr. Depp before he ever laid a hand on her. And now, in this courtroom, she has suddenly erased an entire year of magic. She wants you to believe that instead of hitting her after a year of magic, Mr. Depp was hitting her immediately. The good times she has testified to about repeatedly in the past apparently never happened. And with the good times erased, Ms. Heard wants you to believe that she gave Mr. Depp a big knife that said, hasta la muerte, until death, to the man who supposedly would get drunk and high and beat her. Ms. Heard admitted to you during this trial that Mr. Depp always wears big, chunky rings on every finger. According to her, he was wearing these rings when he'd slap her, hit her, punch her in the face. But you have not seen a single photograph that reflects serious injuries Ms. Heard would have sustained if this was true. Not one. Ms. Heard testified to an incident in March 2013 when Mr. Depp supposedly hit her multiple times in the face while wearing rings. And this is what her face looked like afterwards. Ms. Heard testified to an incident in Russia where she claims Mr. Depp whacked her in the face and gave her a bloody nose. She didn't take pictures of her bloody nose, but her photograph was taken on that trip, and this is what she looked like. Ms. Heard told you that there was an incident the night of the Met Gala in May 2014 when Mr. Depp supposedly whacked Ms. Heard in the face, leaving her with a red, discolored, and swollen nose that she felt was broken. Ms. Heard didn't show you any photographs of these alleged injuries, but photographs were taken of her the following night, and there were no visible injuries to Ms. Heard's face. Ms. Heard testified that in January 2015, while she and Mr. Depp were in Tokyo, Mr. Depp knelt on her back so aggressively that she was concerned that bruises would be visible in her backless dress. Here's Ms. Heard in that backless dress. Ms. Heard testified that after an incident in December 2015, she had 2 black eyes, a broken nose, and chunks of hair missing. The assault was allegedly so violent that there was blood left all over the pillows, and Mr. Depp had broken the bed frame. Pictures were taken of that bed frame. And in that picture, there appears to be a pocket knife on the bed. And that picture fails to capture the bloody pillows. And here is what Ms. Heard looked like on the James Corden show the next day. Indeed, you heard from Ms. Heard's own nurse, Erin Filati, that she saw her a day or two afterwards and could not visualize the injuries Ms. Heard described. Ms. Heard did take pictures of herself after this alleged incident. But are the injuries reflected in these photographs consistent? That's the question. Are they consistent with the brutal assault and serious injuries Ms. Heard has testified to? Or are these injuries more consistent with Mr. Depp's testimony that he and Ms. Heard bumped heads while he was trying to restrain Ms. Heard to keep her from attacking him? Out of Australia, where Mr. Depp sustained the most serious injury from his relationship with Ms. Heard spun a story of horror. A 3-day ordeal with a drug-fueled Mr. Depp violently assaulting her, cutting his own finger off, dragging her through glass, and then bending her back over a counter and raping her with a whiskey bottle. She claimed that she had bruises on her face, cuts all over her arms and feet, and was bleeding from her vagina from the sexual assault. And what did Ms. Heard say she did? She went upstairs, took some sleeping pills, and went to sleep. The next morning, she took pictures of the mirrors her husband had written on in paint using his amputated finger. She took no pictures of herself, her alleged injuries, or the property damage she testified to in this courtroom. When Malcolm Connolly, Jerry Judge, Dr. Kipper, and Nurse Debbie Lloyd arrived to extract Mr. Depp and get him medical treatment for his finger injury, you heard from Mr. Connolly, Dr. Kipper, and Ms. Lloyd. All of them testified they did not observe any injuries to Ms. Heard, and no one, including Ms. Heard, testified that she sought medical treatment. You also heard from Ben King. He also saw Ms. Heard right after this alleged incident. He flew home with her to Los Angeles. He testified that Ms. Heard didn't want to leave, that she said, I can't leave. It will be the end if I leave. He also testified that once they did leave for Los Angeles, Ms. Heard asked him if he ever got so mad he just lost it. When Ms. Heard arrived in Los Angeles, she saw Travis McGivern, who also testified he observed no injuries, and her personal nurse, Erin Filati, who documented no requests for medical treatment and no injuries in her nursing notes for Ms. Heard. You heard from Mr. Depp's sister, Christy, that she also saw Ms. Heard when she arrived back to Los Angeles and observed no injuries on Ms. Heard. Christy testified that when she told Ms. Heard her fighting with Mr. Depp was unsustainable, Ms. Heard responded that Christy should get off her cross, that Mr. Depp liked her feisty. Ms. Heard's testimony about what occurred in Australia just doesn't add up. That's because there was a monster in that house in Australia, but it wasn't Mr. Depp. It was Ms. Heard. Other than Ms. Heard's testimony, all the evidence you've seen in this trial shows that it was Ms. Heard who attacked and grievously wounded Mr. Depp when she threw a vodka bottle at him, severing his finger. Mr. Depp told Dr. Kipper that when Dr. Kipper arrived to treat Mr. Depp's finger. You've seen the pictures of the bar area in Australia with the broken vodka bottles on the ground and trails of blood drops on the floor and a bloody tissue on the floor. You've heard from Ben King that the tip of Mr. Depp's finger was found in the same bar area. And you heard from Dr. Gilbert that the injury to Mr. Depp's finger could have been caused exactly as he described. And interestingly, you heard from Christina Sexton that Ms. Heard told her that Mr. Depp injured his finger while swinging a bottle around. Not smashing a phone, as Ms. Heard surmised in this courtroom, but swinging a bottle around. You also heard from Ms. Sexton that Ms. Heard first told her about the bottle rape in Australia while Ms. Sexton was at Ms. Heard's home, meeting with her lawyers, the day before Ms. Sexton was scheduled to be deposed in this case. The evidence presented at this trial shows that this is not the only time that Ms. Heard disclosed a sexual assault at a convenient time for purposes of litigation she's involved in. The first time Ms. Heard claimed that Mr. Depp sexually assaulted her in the Bahamas in December 2015 was after Tara Roberts, the manager of Mr. Depp's island, submitted a sworn statement in the UK action describing the incident she testified to in this courtroom, where Ms. Heard chased Mr. Depp out of the house, was yelling and then pleading with Mr. Depp to stay while clawing at his hair and clothes, and left Mr. Depp with an injury to his face. That's the first time she disclosed it, after there was contrary evidence. Ms. Heard testified about another incident just 2 weeks after the events in Australia, where Mr. Depp supposedly attacked Ms. Heard and almost pushed her sister Whitney down the stairs. Whitney is the only witness that you heard from that backs up Ms. Heard's version of events. She's it. And the only witness, other than Ms. Heard, who claims to have seen Mr. Depp physically attack Ms. Heard. But just like Ms. Heard's version of the events in Australia, her testimony about the staircase incident and that of her sister Whitney's just doesn't square up with the other evidence in this trial. Their testimony is contradicted by the testimony of Travis McGivern and Debbie Lloyd, who were there that night. Ms. Heard and Whitney testified that Mr. Depp threw a Red Bull can that hit or almost hit Ms. Lloyd. Ms. Lloyd testified that never happened. Mr. McGivern testified that it was Ms. Heard who threw a can at Mr. Depp. Ms. Heard testified that Whitney was between her and Mr. Depp when she punched him. Mr. McGivern testified that he was the one between Ms. Heard and Mr. Depp when Ms. Heard punched Mr. Depp. Ms. Heard testified that Mr. Depp was able to get his hands in her hair, yank her, and then hit her in the face with the cast he had on. But you heard from Ms. Lloyd and Dr. Colbert, Mr. Depp's medical doctor, who treated Mr. Depp's finger injury, that Mr. Depp's finger was in a delicate state. He had a pin in his finger, a skin graft, and a soft cast that immobilized Mr. Depp's 2 middle fingers. And tellingly, the only picture of an injury from this incident is of Mr. Depp with a shiner. And then we have May 21st, 2016. Ms. Heard testified that Mr. Depp threw a phone at her face, causing a visible injury. Ms. Heard has shown you pictures she claims to show this injury, but these photographs are not to be trusted. You heard from Mr. Neumeister that, like many of the photographs Ms. Heard has presented in this case, these photos were stored in a photo editing application. And these photos show signs of manipulation. These 2 photographs were taken at the exact same time and have the exact same file name, but they are visually different. One shows significantly more redness on Ms. Heard's face than the other, which doesn't show any injury at all. Ms. Heard testified that the difference is explained by turning on a light. But there is no way Ms. Heard could have taken a picture, turned on a light, and then taken another picture with every hair in the exact same place within the same second. It's impossible. Moreover, you heard from multiple witnesses, including Officer Melissa Sines, Officer Tyler Haddon, and Officer William Gatlin, Isaac Baruch, Alejandro Romero, who saw Ms. Heard on or after May 21st and saw no injuries to her face before she showed up to that courthouse with a mark on May 27th. And the very next day, after Ms. Heard walked into court with what appeared to be a bruise on her face to obtain a domestic violence restraining order against Mr. Depp, Ms. Heard was photographed laughing with her best friend, fresh-faced, with no bruise on her face.
Nice moment of pacing there.
The mountain of evidence that Mr. Depp abused Ms. Heard is simply not there. What we have is a mountain of unproven allegations that are wild, over the top, and implausible. And you can't pick and choose which of these wild allegations to believe and which ones to disregard. You either believe all of it or none of it. Either Mr. Depp sexually assaulted Ms. Heard with a bottle in Australia, or Ms. Heard got up on that stand in front of all of you and made up that horrific tale of abuse. Either she's a victim of truly horrific abuse, or she is a woman who is willing to say absolutely anything. It is disturbing to think that Ms. Heard would make up the horrific tales of abuse that she testified to in this courtroom. But this case doesn't come down to whether you believe Ms. Heard or you believe Mr. Depp. This case comes down to whether you believe Ms. Heard or you believe Mr. Depp, Christy Dombrowski, Sean Bett, Malcolm Connolly, Travis McGivern, Starling Jenkins, Keenan Wyatt, Dr. Kipper, nurses Debbie Lloyd and Aaron Filati, Tara Roberts, Ben King, Kate James, Kate Moss, Dr. Colber, Morgan Knight, Morgan Tremaine, Officers Melissa Sines, Officers Tyler Haddon, Officer William Gatlin,
I'm so happy they went with
and
this.
Beverly Leonard. What Ms. Heard testified to in this courtroom is the story of far too many women. But the overwhelming evidence, weight of that evidence, shows that it's not her story. It's not Ms. Heard's story. It was an act of profound cruelty, not just to Mr. Depp, but to true survivors of domestic abuse. For Ms. Heard to hold herself out as a public figure representing domestic abuse. It was false, it was defamatory, and it caused irreparable harm. And to talk more about that, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague and my friend, Mr. Chu.
I don't know why I turned it over, man. 9.8
doing
out
so
of
well.
10. You're pretty much crushing it.
That was good. Good way to end it
You
too.
just got a 98% on the exam, girl. Damn.
Big Ben's going to come in and clean things up here.
Smiling. I can't believe she's not like overwrought with.
Thank you, Camille.
Concern.
Logistics are not our strong suit. And thanks to all of you, truly, for taking so much time over these last several weeks to listen to Mr. Depp, to his friends, to his family, and to so many others who have come forward physically in this courtroom, some from a very long distance, to tell you the truth, and to finally, after so many years, to correct the record. As Ms. Vasquez said, you have now come to know the real Amber Heard. Scary. We also told you at the start of this trial that you were going to come to know the real Johnny Depp, not the many characters you've seen him play so wonderfully in the movies, but the man himself. We kept that promise. You've met the real Johnny Depp. You have heard that Mr. Depp came from humble, very difficult beginnings. You have heard from Mr. Depp's big sister, who's here in the courtroom today, Christy Dombrowski, who told you how Mr. Depp grew up in a deeply troubled household with a mother, Betty Sue, who was physically abusive and mentally cruel. As Ms. Dombrowski testified, one of the names that Betty Sue called Mr. Depp when he was a little boy was One Eye, because he had to wear an eye patch for some time. His mother used to hit his father and the kids, including young Mr. Depp. And when his mother got violent, Mr. Depp would retreat and find a place to hide. Sometimes he and his sister Christy would find a place to hide together. Mr. Depp never hit back. And like his father, he either stood up and took the violence or he retreated from it. Those are habits he returned to later when he found himself in a relationship with another person who returned his love with abuse, with physical abuse. And despite this long, unhappy history with his mother, Johnny never turned his back on her. In her elder years, Mr. Depp moved his mother to California, and he moved her to Los Angeles right across the street from his house, so his two children could get to know her. He hired nurses for his mother. He made sure to take care of her and to make her comfortable. She never went to hospice. She had the nurses make her comfortable to the day she died. And from those humble and difficult beginnings, Mr. Depp grew into one of the greatest actors and movie stars of his generation. Now, he came to Los Angeles with his first love as a young man, planning to be a musician. Music had been a part of his life ever since he found peace himself in his room as a young boy, when he was escaping, and he learned to play the guitar and would use it as solace. But it was an actor as his star began its rise, as he appeared in films too many to mention, including, of course, his iconic role as Captain Jack Sparrow in the Pirates of the Caribbean franchise. Fame came with challenges to Mr. Depp and his family. It was a strange experience for a shy young man from Kentucky to be thrust into the limelight, pursued by paparazzi, and to have even his very name become a brand. But he did his best to live a private, quiet life, and despite it all, and over the years built a reputation as a respected artist and as a decent, very well-liked man, which you've heard from many people. Mr. Depp dated major figures like Winona Ryder, Kate Moss, and Vanessa Paradis, with whom he spent 14 years together and with whom they had their children. Before Amber Heard, ladies and gentlemen, no woman ever before Amber Heard ever claimed that Mr. Depp raised a hand to her in his 58 years. And no other woman since Ms. Heard made that false claim back on May 27th, 2016, and repeated it in her December 2018 op-ed. Has any woman come forward since? This is Me Too without any Me Too. To the contrary, ladies and gentlemen, you heard Kate Moss 2 days ago testify. This is a woman who has never testified in any proceeding ever, a very private person, testified that Mr. Depp never abused her and that Ms. Heard lied to you. And she lied to you twice when she told you.
Objection, Your Honor. That Ms. Short.
Ooh, closing argument objection.
Very frowned upon closing argument objections unless there's
bad
a
move.
good reason. Yeah.
Ladies and gentlemen, as I was saying, Ms. Heard lied to you twice when she suggested to you that Mr. Depp pushed Kate Moss down the stairs. You told her, you heard her say just 2 days ago that Mr. Depp never did that, and he never hit her, and he never kicked her. That was one of—
Objection, Your Honor. That's not what she testified to.
Exactly
We
what
just
she
discussed
testified.
that. Overruled.
Thank you, Your Honor. They're still at it.
What is happening?
Ms. Heard and her
Still
lawyers
at it.
have spent much of this trial talking about drugs and alcohol. Mr. Depp is no saint, and he has never claimed to be one. He has made mistakes in his life, as we all have. Yes, he has struggled with drugs and alcohol, but you never heard him deny them. We told you that in the opening statement. He owns his flaws. He admits to them. He told you all about them. But he is not a violent abuser. He's not an abuser, as Ms. Heard claims. And he did not and does not deserve to have his life, his legacy, destroyed by a vicious lie. And this is, as Ms. Vasquez said, this is the 6th anniversary of that. There is a world of difference between having substance abuse problems and being a physical abuser. Ms. Heard falsely accused Mr. Depp of beating her. That was her first allegation, and you know why, and you know that wasn't true. Then, years after the fact, for the first time, she accused him of raping her. The lies have grown and metastasized over time, and they need to be stopped. And those false accusations have caused more harm to Mr. Depp than her fists ever did. And make no mistake, Ms. Heard has admitted, unlike Mr. Depp, Ms. Heard has admitted on the audio tapes you've heard at this trial, and Ms. Vasquez just played you a few of them, she has admitted repeatedly to physically abusing Mr. Depp. And I would just like to take a minute to talk about the harm to Mr. Depp and his family. You have heard from several of the people in Mr. Depp's life about the damage Ms. Heard's lies have done to him. You heard from his sister, Christy, who told you how hard it has been on his family and on her little brother personally. You heard from Mr. Depp's friend of 4 decades, and that speaks volumes about Mr. Depp. He has lifetime friends who appear for him. Mr. Baruch told you how Mr. Depp and his family had been, quote, completely wrecked, unquote, by Ms. Heard's lies. You heard Mr. Depp testify that he has lost nothing less than everything because of Ms. Heard's lies. Nothing less than everything. You heard about Mr. Depp's children, Jack and Lily Rose, His children have had to hear these allegations since 2016. And then when that started to die down, they had to hear them again. This time in December 2018, this time in the Washington Post, which is a national and international publication. And Mr. Depp has had to live with the knowledge that his children will keep hearing those false rumors and statements against him. Mr. Depp has millions of fans, people who grew up watching him on 21 Jump Street, which is something you heard mock on one of the tapes that was played to you. Or they grew up watching him play the swashbuckling pirate Captain Jack Sparrow in the Pirates of the Caribbean movies, or Willy Wonka. Mr. Depp means something to those people, and those people mean a lot to Mr. Depp. He's a fond memory from childhood or adolescence or adulthood. And to tarnish him as an abuser is to destroy him in the eyes of many of these people who will never look at him the same way again. And because of what Ms. Heard did, and because of what she said, Mr. Depp will go to his grave knowing no matter what he does, no matter the outcome of this trial, there are people who used to look up to him who now believe that he beat a woman, which is the worst thing you can say about a man. Beyond the personal and emotional effects of Ms. Heard's lies, their impact on Mr. Depp and his family, the damage she inflicted on his reputation and career is undeniable. There's an old saying that a good reputation takes a lifetime to build, but only a second to destroy. Mr. Depp spent, in fact, a lifetime building his reputation as one of the greatest actors and movie stars of his generation, an iconic figure respected and liked throughout Hollywood and recognized and admired throughout the world. You heard evidence from Jack Wiggum, who was here today, Mr. Depp's agent, who explained that Mr. Depp, quote, was very well regarded and respected by peers in the artistic community, unquote. And you heard further testimony from Mr. Wiggum that Mr. Depp had a deal with Disney to play Captain Jack Sparrow in the 6th movie sequel of the Pirates of the Caribbean franchise for $22.5 million. But as Mr. Wiggum explained, all of that changed when Ms. Heard published her op-ed in December of 2018 in the Washington Post. Quoting from the testimony you heard by Mr. Wiggum, quote, after the op-ed, it was impossible to get him a studio film, which is what we normally would have focused on in that time period, unquote. Another quote, it was on the damage, the impact of this op-ed, as opposed to the other stories that you saw, the other publications. Mr. Wiggum explained why this one was so damaging. Quote, it was a first-person account. I mean, from the victim. It's extremely impactful. You know, with respect to Johnny, it was catastrophic because it was coming from a first-person account. It was not from a journalist. It was coming from someone observing. It was from someone saying, this happened to me, unquote. You also heard from Richard Marks, an expert in the inner workings of Hollywood and the entertainment industry, who explained that the impact of Ms. Heard's allocations on Mr. Depp was devastating. Quote, it's devastating. It's the type of claim, the Me Too claim of sexual violence, domestic abuse that has canceled a list of actors, unquote. And for many, and Mr. Depp would agree with this, rightfully so, Me Too is an important movement, a movement that Mr. Depp supports and believes in. It's for true survivors of abuse, not Ms. Heard. True victims need protection, and true perpetrators need to face the repercussions. But as you've heard in this case, Amber Heard is not a true victim, and Mr. Depp certainly is not an abuser. Again, nobody has come out of the woodwork to say Me Too. This is the unique and singular Me Too case where there's not a single Me Too. In fact, to the contrary, Kate Moss, who was in a romantic relationship with Mr. Depp for 3 years, which he broke off, came forward to say, no, he never pushed her down any stairs. And you heard Doug Banya, an expert in internet and social media analytics, testify to the impact that Ms. Heard's allegations had on Mr. Depp's popularity. Ms. Heard's lawyers tried to tell you that all of the damage done to Mr. Depp's career was because of his own behavior, because he was sometimes unprofessional or sometimes late to set. But that doesn't hold up. Mr. Depp has been a major figure in Hollywood for decades. Yes, Mr. Depp was late to set sometimes. But as Richard Marx testified, quote, when you hire Johnny Depp, you get all of Johnny Depp, which includes being late, unquote. Keenan Wyatt, who has worked for decades as a sound engineer on some of Mr. Depp's films, said much the same thing. And by the way, Mr. Wyatt is not and never has been an employee of Mr. Depp. He's just worked with him on movies. Mr. Depp wasn't canceled by Hollywood because he was sometimes late to set. He was canceled because Ms. Heard falsely accused him of domestic violence and sexual violence on the pages of the Washington Post on December 18, 2018, repeating the prior lies of May 17, 2016. And as you saw at trial, Ms. Heard published the op-ed on December 18, 2018, 2 years after her public allegations of domestic abuse. Ms. Heard's publication of the op-ed coincided with the release of her major movie Aquaman that December. And it coincided as well with her announcement on Twitter that she was becoming an ACLU ambassador for women's rights.
Kelly
And
Faria,
in that
thank you.
op-ed,
Very generous.
Ms. Heard repeated her false allegations against Mr. Depp. Now, she didn't mention his name. She didn't have to. Everyone knew exactly who and what Ms. Heard was talking about. Ms. Heard got on the stand and tried to tell you that the op-ed was not about Mr. Depp. She then said, well, it wasn't just about Mr. Depp. But she couldn't deny, and this was yesterday, that this was at least partly about Mr. Depp. The op-ed obviously is about Mr. Depp, and the testimony at trial proves that. You will recall testimony from the ACLU's representative, an attorney, stating that Mr. Depp's name was included in drafts of the op-ed and that they and others understood that the op-ed was about Mr. Depp. Specifically, the ACLU representative testified, among other things, quote, based on my review of prior drafts of the op-ed, I knew that she was referring to Johnny Depp and the marriage, unquote. Ms. Heard's claim that the op-ed is not about Mr. Depp is just another one of her many, many lies. In fact, what you have seen time and time again through the course of this trial is that Ms. Heard lies. She lies all the time about things that are important and the things that aren't important. She just can't seem to stop. And as Ms. Vasquez said, what she routinely does is she doesn't take ownership or responsibility for anything, and she has an excuse for everything. But in this courtroom, confronted with the evidence, she can't run away from her own words. As my colleague said, words matter, and Ms. Heard is condemned by her own words. So Tom, let's please take a look at the words she used in her op-ed, which is Plaintiff's Exhibit 1, and which Ms. Heard published in December 2018, 2 years after she first publicly accused Mr. Depp of being an abuser on May 27, 2016. The title of the op-ed reads, as you can see, quote, Amber Heard, I spoke up against sexual violence and faced our culture's wrath. That has to change, unquote. Below that, Ms. Heard states, quote, then 2 years ago, I became a public figure representing domestic abuse, and I felt the full force of our culture's wrath for women who speak out, unquote. And below that, Ms. Heard states, quote, I had the rare vantage point of seeing in real time how institutions protect men accused of abuse, unquote. Each of those statements clearly refers to Ms. Heard's allegations against Mr. Depp. And taken collectively, their message and their implication about Mr. Depp is clear, i.e. that Ms. Heard is a survivor of domestic abuse and that Mr. Depp is a perpetrator. The context in the rest of the op-ed makes that clear as well. Consider, for instance, this line, quote, imagine a powerful man as a ship, like the Titanic. That ship is a huge enterprise. When it strikes an iceberg, there are a lot of people on board desperate to patch up holes, not because they believe in or even care about the ship, but because their own fates depend upon the enterprise, unquote. Everyone in Hollywood knew, and everyone in this courtroom now knows exactly what Ms. Heard intended those words to mean. The ship, the Titanic, is Mr. Depp. And Ms. Heard was the iceberg for Mr. Depp. The ones truly at the heart of this case are questions 2, 3, and 4 on the verdict form. Unquote. Disavow the title. To the contrary, she's proclaiming it. And at the same time, Ms. Heard posted what I heard meant by abuse. 2000 as Mr. Depp supposed misinformed that she shouldn't be held this morning in post exhibits. Ms. Heard, as you all can see on the screen, retweeted the article, including the title on her Twitter page. Ms. Heard put her name on it. And she proudly declared, quote, today I published this op-ed in the Washington Post, ellipsis, unquote. Her tweet includes the title with the words, quote, I spoke up against sexual violence, unquote, prominently featured. Nowhere in this tweet or anywhere else does Ms. Heard disavow the title. To the contrary, she's proclaiming it. And at the same time, Ms. Heard posted this tweet, she posted another, which you can see right beneath it. Quote, I'm honored to announce my role as an ACLU ambassador on women's rights, unquote, aggrandizing herself at the expense of Mr. Depp. So make no mistake, this was about Mr. Depp. In the wake of the Me Too movement, with her ACLU ambassadorship and a major movie coming out, Ms. Heard was trading on her accusations of abuse against Mr. Depp. She was reminding everyone of those allegations. She was once again taking on the role of her lifetime, the heroic survivor of vicious abuse, or to use her phrase, quote, a public figure representing abuse. And she was once again casting Mr. Depp as the villain in her drama, the supposed perpetrator of that abuse. When you meet to deliberate this case, you're going to be tasked with several questions. Those questions appear on a form that you will use to reach your verdict in this case. So I'd just like to ask you, please, to spend a few minutes with me going through that. Tom, would you please put up the special verdict form so the jury can see it? Some of it's hard to read, so maybe Tom might please blow it up. Oh, thank you very much. You will see here the first page of the verdict form relating to Mr. Depp's claim for defamation against Ms. Heard. There are 3 pages relating to Mr. Depp's claim, one for each of the 3 defamatory statements in the op-ed that form the basis of Mr. Depp's claim against Ms. Heard. You've heard those three statements many times, but they bear repeating, I promise, just once more here. One, quote, I spoke up against sexual violence and faced our culture's wrath. That has to change, unquote. Two, then 2 years ago, I became a public figure representing domestic abuse, and I felt the full force of our culture's wrath for women who speak out, unquote. Three, I had the rare vantage point of seeing in real time how institutions protect men accused of abuse, unquote. Now, there are 7 questions that you will need to please answer with respect to each of those statements. So that's 21 questions, I think, but 7 as to each statement. 1, was the statement made or published by Ms. Heard? 2, was the statement about Mr. Depp? 3, was the statement false? 4, did the statement have a defamatory implication about Mr. Depp? 5, was the defamatory implication designed and intended by Ms. Heard? 6, was the defamatory implication conveyed to someone other than Mr. Depp? 7, did Ms. Heard make the statement with actual malice, which is, Her Honor explained, meaning did Ms. Heard make the statement knowing it was false or with reckless disregard as to the truth? Ladies and gentlemen, the evidence clearly shows that the answers to those 7 questions are all yes. And if you answer yes to all of those questions, which you should, we respectfully submit, you will be asked to state the amount of damages to which Mr. Depp is entitled. In the wake of the Me Too movement, movie producers know better than to cast a movie star who has been accused of domestic and sexual violence. And it is entirely within your discretion as jurors to quantify the amount of money that constitutes fair compensation for Mr. Depp's pain and humiliation inflicted by Ms. Heard's defamation. But while Mr. Depp certainly is entitled to monetary compensation, this case, at least for Mr. Depp, has never been about money. This case for Mr. Depp has never been about money. Nor is it about punishing Ms. Heard. It is about Mr. Depp's reputation and freeing him from the prison in which he has lived for the last 6 years, and it's 6 years to the day. The most important questions for Mr. Depp, the ones truly at the heart of this case, are questions 2, 3, and 4 on the verdict form. And while Tom's pulling that up, let's take question 2. Thank you. Were the statements about Mr. Depp? Yes. 2 points here. 1, when the ACLU pitched the op-ed to the Washington Post, I think you'll remember this, they pitched it as, quote, a piece by Amber Heard, who, as you know, was beaten up during her brief marriage to Johnny Depp, unquote. That's how they pitched it. 2, after the op-ed was published, news outlets, including USA Today, and you've seen that was an exhibit, characterized the op-ed as referring to Ms. Heard's allegations of abuse against Mr. Depp. So the USA Today interpreted it that way, and so did many other publications. They got exactly the implication that Ms. Heard and the ACLU intended them to have. Tom, if you would please pull up Plaintiff's Exhibit 409 and 411, if you could put them side by side. And this was expected. This is what they wanted. There had been a lot of press 2 years prior to the publication of the op-ed about Ms. Heard's claims of abuse against Mr. Depp when she walked into court with her publicist to obtain the domestic violence, the no notice, ex parte, meaning Mr. Depp's lawyer was not informed and he was already in New York, which he testified Ms. Heard was well aware of. You don't need a domestic violence restraining order when your husband is halfway across the continent and is heading for a European tour. On May 27, 2016, with a purported mark on her face, everyone knew exactly who and what Ms. Heard was referring to in the op-ed. She was referring to Mr. Depp. Let's take questions 2 and 3 next, if we can. Were each of the statements false? And did the statements have a defamatory implication on Mr. Depp? Again, the clear answer is yes. The statements, understood in the context of the op-ed itself and in the broader context of the press coverage of Ms. Heard walking into the court with a mark on her face to obtain a domestic violence restraining order against Mr. Depp in May 2016, clearly imply that Mr. Depp physically and sexually abused Ms. Heard. The overwhelming evidence that you all have heard and has come forward in this case shows that those allegations are false and despicably false. Mr. Depp did not physically abuse Ms. Heard. He did not sexually abuse Ms. Heard. You've heard audio after audio where Ms. Heard admits that she was physically abusing him. While Mr. Depp's name will be forever tarnished by these horrendous and false allegations, this case is about telling you his story and the truth about what really happened, which you've now heard. It is about restoring his lost reputation. It's about showing Mr. Depp's children, Lily Rose and Jack, that the truth is worth fighting for. It is. And it's about restoring Mr. Depp's name and standing in the community to the fullest extent that you can. And you can do something. And only you, ladies and gentlemen, can do that for him. You heard from Mr. Depp yesterday that he has been carrying these outlandish, outrageous stories on his back, pretty stoically, and living them with them for 6 years, and waiting to be able to bring his truth out. And he has told you the truth, the unvarnished truth, even truth that pretty embarrassing. He knew that was going to happen when he brought this case. You've seen the evidence in this case over 6 long weeks, which we again thank you for. That evidence shows overwhelmingly that Ms. Heard's attempt to paint herself as a heroic survivor, an innocent survivor, and Mr. Depp as a terrifying abuser are utterly false. We ask you to please return your verdict for Mr. Depp. We ask you, we implore you to give him his name, his reputation, and his career back. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, let's go ahead and take a break at this time. Again, this case has not been submitted to you yet. We will continue with closing arguments when we come back, so do not discuss the case with yourselves. Don't do any outside research, okay? Thank you.
Guy, so the one sentence is something along the lines of, well, we think Hollywood agents and directors and whatnot know best. But this was never really about the money. So it's like, you know, we're magnanimous. We're the guys you want to have win. And then if you happen to put a 5 and a number of zeros after it, well, I mean, we're not the jury.
We wouldn't exactly have a problem with you giving us money.
So I just had a couple of little points that I wrote down as I was listening, if that's okay.
Of course.
So I had some like pluses and minuses as far as this closing was concerned. Camille, both of their closings were technical as far as like what trial advocacy is supposed to be in that, and I mean that in a good way. So one thing that Camille did and Ben did was call back to what they promised in opening. And as the party bearing the burden, you have to always do that. Or when you do that, it's very effective because defense counsel will point out when you have not kept up with your promises. I do that. It's a strategy that I use. Look at what they promised you versus look at what you heard in the trial, right? And you're
Cashing
only
those
to
checks.
consider the actual evidence. And they were able to point to each area that they actually promised and fulfilled. And I don't think that they'll be able to say in defense that they didn't fulfill anything. Also, there were several points in which Camille turned Amber's own witnesses against her. So you
Mhm.
heard from Amber's own witness, like Dr. Hughes, for example, and they said this, or you heard from the acting coach and they said that, and that's how it actually supports our claim. So even her evidence supports our claim. That's a very powerful thing for a jury to hear
Very
in
effective.
closing. And then and then also I understood that Ben was coming for the technical elements that have to be established for each claim plus damages. And but that leads me into my kind of minuses, which is that
Sure.
I think it's a really bad idea to split who the attorneys are doing the initial closing and then the rebuttal closing. I'm okay if it's two different attorneys doing initial and rebuttal, versus one attorney doing both. I know some attorneys hate that. They want one attorney to do both. But I'm really not okay with splitting it in between because the change in pace is kind of jarring. And in comparison, because Camille is plucky and compassionate and Ben is more staid, he seemed more boring in comparison to her, even though what he had to
did.
say was very important because it established elements. So I would have just picked one or the other to do that. And then you guys were noticing it, but it's a stylistic thing. But I really am against reading a speech during closing arguments. You make your bullet
Yes.
points to bring you back to your bullet points, but you don't write out your entire speech. And there was one moment there where Camille got tripped up on what she was reading and
sure
she said
did.
the opposite of what she intended to say
Oh,
and didn't really
no.
clean it up.
Yeah.
And they're going to use that in their closing for the defense. So, but
You're talking
otherwise,
about you're talking
sorry.
about abuser.
Yes, that
Yeah,
she made
she
these
definitely
accusations.
pauses.
Yes, and it was clear that she didn't make this mean to call Johnny her abuser, but she did it, and because she didn't want to go back and draw more
Yep.
attention to it, she moved on, but it was still hanging there in the air.
Yeah.
She should have cleaned it up, and that like you said, it's been a 6-week trial. Probably one of the longest civil trials, that's been televised, probably one of the longest.
Ever,
And
right?
yeah, and so I get it. There's a lot of information there that you have to go back to, but that's what your co-counsels are there to help you with. And that's what mooting I think mooting helps more than having it all written out. And mooting is where you practice it with your co-counsels, you practice it with your client, you practice it over and over until it's committed to memory. I just don't think that that was a good idea to read it, but otherwise it was a very good closing, I think effective, and the evidence is on their side, and then they still have rebuttal to clean up any mistakes.
They have a lot of good facts, don't they? I had
Yeah.
forgotten half those. I know that's the purpose of closing arguments, but
Yeah.
they have a lot of good facts. And Natalie, does it change your opinion on the pairing up of the closing at all if you know in advance that the other side's going to pair the closing? Does that change anything? Because they're going to go with two lawyers as well.
Right. It's just okay. So they're gonna go with it's a couple of things. They're gonna go with two lawyers, but are they gonna get to have a rebuttal closing because they have their
Yes.
own case?
Yes.
Yeah,
And
it's
They
four
get a
four
rebuttal.
I
rounds.
still, yeah. So, oh my goodness. So I still would not have done it this way. Now, this is just me.
Yeah, of course.
You know what I'm saying? This is just my stylistic opinion. I would not have done it that way. Just even that transition where you're changing mics and you
Yep.
have that lull. I just think you can lose your jury sometimes. Again, they have great facts on their side. It probably doesn't matter, but it's just, just to be like technical, just to point things out. That's what I would say. But overall, I think it was a great closing. But no, even if the other side was doing it, I would let them be the ones to fumble and look. You don't need to match the other side and the things that they do when they're
That's why I asked the questions. I
Yeah.
always love your insight on this stuff, Natalie. So
So, I agree with you in part. I think it's ideal to try to commit to memory the closing if you're going to go that way and have it pre-written out to commit to memory. But all things being considered, I don't think Vasquez lost very much by it being written. I thought she had a very good ability to maintain with the jury and maintain eye contact and engagement with the jury. So if you're trying to balance this out in terms of like the factors, is like, if my choices are, do I write it out completely and read it, or do I do the bullet point thing and try to improv it and maybe risk losing something in this case when I have all these really good points that are good? I think Vasquez made the right decision on balance. I think what she had was so effective, and I think her abilities. I don't think she lost very much by being written, as opposed to an opening where she was just kind of holding it.
Well, the funny thing is,
and that was kind of weird.
That was I do agree that it's better that she had the podium than in the opening when she just had her papers in front of her. And at the end of the day, what is most important? I mean, we're practitioners, so we're gonna get down to the brass tacks of like what we would expect for the ideal, but at the end of the day, also what is most important is that she's able to give ammunition to the jury to find in his favor, and particularly what they're doing is they are communicating to the ones that are already supportive of Johnny on their side, so that they can do the remaining work for Johnny Depp's team to convince the others.
Right.
That is ultimately at the end of the day that is what they need to be doing.
Let's be facts now and fire on rebuttal.
Yeah,
it's possible, but I the problem. All right, so the closing was great. I think what Natalie said is 110% accurate. I couldn't agree more. But I do think they've left themselves holes for attack. Some really, really, I think, good holes if Amber's team could close the way I think they should close. And the avenues of attack are, you know what? You should believe Johnny Depp. You should believe it when he said he headbutted her. You should believe Johnny Depp when he said he pushed her. You should believe Johnny Depp when he said he headbutted her, right? So this is not the he said, she said that they're talking about. He's admitted to these things, right? He said he did these things. Now, no matter what people think, in 2020, are we really going to sit here and believe that a man the woman who has two black eyes, a busted nose, and comes to you and says he headbutted me, he abused me, and his response is, yes, it was an accident. How many times have we heard this before? So we're not saying don't believe Amber. We're saying believe Johnny. And you work it that way. And then you align the facts that support this, right? Support Johnny did this, Johnny did that, because her credibility, I think, is shot. But I think there's enough facts here where you can muddy it enough to say he's admitted to all this stuff. She's admitted to hitting him. It's so muddy. But the question here is simple. You go right back to the law.
Right.
Did he abuse her? Well, you don't have to believe what Amber says. If you believe everything she's saying is a lie, you just got to believe what Johnny said. And is that a lie? That's kind of the way I would try to twist it, because you really don't have anything with Amber. You can't put Amber and say she's telling the truth, right? I don't think that's going to win. But I think it wins if you can rely on the evidence and kind of just put it to the point where here's the direction we want to go.
And if I could just say something briefly. I'm sorry. No, you have a super chat. I'm sorry.
Oh, I was just going to say, Emily, thanks so much for the super chat. It says, to have your own lawyers become emotionally captivated in representing you. Now that is on a higher level. Yes. Thank you. Go ahead.
That's a good point. Thank you. Okay. So I just wanted to say this because it's something that I've seen that, I don't really care about, people's opinion of my opinion, but I've seen it with my opinion, but with also other attorneys' opinions on here when they're saying something like, Amber's attorney made a good point doing this, or Johnny's attorney could have done better doing this, that people like, because you're in a certain camp, might feel like defensive. And I can see it in the comment section. I just want you to understand that this is not, this has nothing to do with that, right? This has to do with the fact that lawyering is a technical skill. The things that we do, right? So like Kurt had a different opinion on Amber's lawyer's performance. I think when they were doing the cross-examination of one of the witnesses, I think they really broke a witness down, and Kurt was like, that was a good cross. Things are good or bad, not because we feel a certain way about the parties, but because, number one, you comply with the rules of evidence. Number two, you comply with the rules of criminal procedure. And there are trial advocacy principles that you follow in conducting your cross, your closing, your opening, your direct, right? And so what we are talking about are things that we have learned as practitioners and also been taught to us by attorneys who are now past, but like lawyering is a very old profession. And there are certain things that you do as a lawyer that we don't reinvent the wheel, right? So when I'm saying that, this could have been a stylistic mistake, it doesn't mean that they necessarily did anything wrong. With the jury that they had, it may totally work with the jury that they have. And it's the practitioners who are in court who are best able to read their jury. We're fortunate here that there's some Law 2 people in court, but for the most part, you usually can't see the people in court other than the practitioners. So I trust all of them, plaintiff and defense, to understand their sides of the case. I am just saying that technically speaking, there are certain little stylistic things that I would not do that may seem like they're quibbling to you guys, but they're not. They're actually important in the totality of the case. And other practitioners may disagree because it's the practice of law, it's not the science of law. So I'm just telling you guys principles. I'm not telling you like a personal opinion.
Yes. Yeah,
Could it
that's
also be
very,
something like
very
Couldn't possibly
beautifully
agree
put.
more.
And I think it's warranted because we all want to be
100%
better.
usually.
We all want to be better at the end of the day. So if there's any flaw at all, if I'm saying, okay, Vasquez is 98, I say Ben Chu is like 90, whether or not I'm right or not. It's like either way, there are flaws. I mean, they're minor flaws to be sure. In Vasquez's case, I'm nitpicking nits. But either way, it's like, well, if I can find something that make it a little bit better, it's like, why don't you want to know that? And I would love to be, it's hard sometimes to be on the receiving end of that, but we all want to be better.
Well,
This
can
like
we
a
talk?
spectator sport, right? We're watching
we're
the game. One
commenting.
team is up
What
by
are we here
one
for?
team is
I
up
was
by
just
30.
about to- just
I
like
could say that was
sports
a bad
commentary.
play. Yeah, I
And-
mean, it's a
Right.
bad play, but that doesn't mean they're going to lose, right?
Can we talk
'Cause,
about can we talk
it
about the
happens.
world's worst objections? All right.
Oh my
This
God.
cat objects
yeah.
twice
Pretty
on
bad.
characterizations that Amber lied to you, and he gets overruled both times. So
Yikes.
that effectively the effect is the judge just said, no, she lied to you.
And
And
then
like
Diaz's
the
nice
actual
comeback
effect
with
of
They're
sequence
Still At
events
It, which was really
Yeah.
good.
is insane.
That was tough.
which
That
is
was a
which
tough
is
one.
which is not of course it's not what Judge Escarati intended. Like
No,
that's
no,
not
no.
she's not
Yeah,
not
but-
ruling on a fact, obviously, but that is what that can sound like. And that's the danger in objecting and getting overruled on an objection is you have to consider like what is this going to look like, on the other side of it.
What was
Especially
Ben's
in
line? It was
closing.
like, "Here they go again" or something on the
Yeah.
second
Yeah,
objection.
yeah.
They're trying to do it again to
They're
you.
still at it. Yeah.
They're still at it. Thank you. Yes, it's like, damn. That was.
That
I
was a
couldn't believe it
nice-
because
that
I was
was a
expecting
nice
some
quip.
objections.
That was quip. I'll give him a
Oh,
bonus
yeah, that was-
point.
He's
on
just a
his example
snarky
for
guy,
that one.
as we know, right?
91%,
He's just a snarky
Ben.
guy.
Bonus point.
Well,
But also I don't want it to get lost that was I will say the closing by both though as a closing and ending on a great note. I think they got what they paid to do. I think they have now at the end of this closing have given the jury a winnable case. And I think that's the best you can ask your attorneys to do in a case like this. They've
good
given the
closing.
jury, I think, what's a winnable case
Yeah.
going into the next piece. The other side has to win it because I think they've done enough to win.
And I'll say that this case was winnable before the closing argument, but what the closing argument did, and I know you don't disagree, but what the closing argument did was that it
First Amendment rights to talk about the situations that they have found themselves in their home. This is
Yeah.
coming.
There you go.
Yes, but then they have to be careful because on rebuttal, your First Amendment
Themselves
right
in their
doesn't
home.
include lying
This is
about people.
coming.
There you go.
Yeah, but
Right.
they've
Yeah,
already
but
said
then-
that. They've already spent an hour saying you're a liar who lies. It doesn't change
Yeah.
anything from their closing.
Yeah, but I think it's just if they try to bring up the First Amendment, all bet just says defamation. You don't have the right to defame people.
I'm willing to bet you First Amendment pops out in this closing.
Oh, it
definitely
will. It will. I just think that's ill-advised.
Well, that might well be, but yeah, they've definitely
What else you
laid
got?
the groundwork.
The Battle Hymn of the Republic is about what you got. Why not?
I'm just saying. Look, if they could play music to backstop their speech, it would
Yes.
be
Yes.
it would be Battle Hymn of the Republic. It would be from sea to shining sea.
I see the chat saying that court is back on.
Beautiful.
Court is back on.
It's not according to what we can see here.
Is our feed delayed?
Oops, that maybe.
Having fun with
Maybe a
feeds
little
today.
delayed.
If they point to the seal and say, "The very seal says to this tyrant, Johnny Depp is a tyrant. Put a boot on him." That'd be great. Is it just me?
Sorry, I'm trying to find. I'm trying to see.
We're
if I
trying to
can,
make sure the
It
feeds
was
come
quiet there
back
for
on.
a while. I was very like, okay.
No,
There's your
sorry.
mic drop moment.
It was good. It was good. It was really good, Kurt.
I've still got Recess on the 2 streams I've checked, but
Okay. Okay.
Okay, just a misreport.
Let's get some super chats here. Sarah H says, I'm realizing how nerdy I am. I find the jury instructions fascinating. Love to you all. Go baseball. That's the brown egg one, right? Jokes. Not a sports fan here. By the way, I have many muffins. I appreciate that. I definitely appreciate that. Let's see here. Mary Hickey asked, who's the woman always arriving and leaving with JD? That her name is Joelle. She's one of his attorneys from the UK case.
Interesting. Why she's here.
Next one. I think there was a pink one that was going to come up here. Walter Beasley says they keep saying May 27th.
Oh, yeah,
they want the verdict
anniversary.
today.
The anniversary. What? I think that was good to hammer on that. 4 years ago today.
Yeah.
And then 2 years later. I mean, that was really, really.
Goes baseline, and Nilakina says,
Very generous. Says if Johnny wins this and gets some minimum of $7 million, he should donate that $7 million Children's Hospital and publish receipts just to stick it to Amber. Well, I'm not going to tell him what to do with his money. But if he did do that, obviously that would be a total mic drop moment.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Tara Mary Watson Lawless says, "What's the?"
Tell you who I think we're gonna play. We're gonna play Boston. Okay, that's who we're gonna play. Thank you. That's the Draymond I know. We're gonna play Boston. That's the Draymond I know. That's the Draymond. You're asking me who I want to play. I'm gonna tell you who I think we're gonna play. We're gonna play Boston. Okay, that's who we're gonna play. Thank you. That's the Draymond I know. We're gonna play Boston.
Criminal trial where very careful with those.
Yeah. M. Lay, thank you so much for your generous super chat. Says all yes, wins 100 million if I was a jury. At the end of the day, Johnny Depp consistently stays with what he said. Let the truth set him free. Even if he wins or not, his actions as of today is for the truth to prevail. Lisa Hass at 12. Wow, thank you so much for Amanda Easter says, question.
Are we ready for the jury?
Explain how they
Okay.
came to their decision. No, they don't.
Yeah, you saw the boxes. Just check the box. Check the box right in a number.
I used to say it, but it was a special.
I'm just so happy.
Anderson says, I know it's just started, but it seems like you'd want to end with Camille. I would have thought that too. I was going to ask folks on the panel about that too, their thoughts on that. If they would have, I know Natalie said that she wasn't really a fan of breaking it up that way at all. But I wonder if maybe it would have gone over a little bit better if Camille had gone second as part of the ramp up.
Yeah.
Brienne says, question, are the lawyers allowed to raise objections during closing arguments? What stops them from breaking the rules the judge laid out? Oh yeah, we just talked about that one. They are allowed, but it's got to be careful about them. Kelly Faria says, thank you so much for everything you do. I feel like every day the past 6 weeks I got to hang out with new friends that I look forward to seeing every morning. You all do an amazing job. I
Thank you. May be seated. All right. Closing arguments. Mr. Rottenborg?
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Andrew Nichols says, question, did they get this in writing? No way I'd remember a fraction of this beat read epic
Seated. All right.
if I was on the jury.
Closing
Yes, they
arguments.
get it in writing.
Mr. Rottenborg? Okay, thank you.
All right, Ron Bourne, show us what you
Yeah.
got.
I think he'll do this pretty well. We'll see.
I wonder if we'll hear about the palette as much as we did in the opening.
That's going to be interesting.
Mr. Rottenborg, is your mic on?
I believe it is.
Oh, there we go. Okay.
Does that work? Okay. In trying to convince you that Mr. Depp has carried his burden of proof in proving that he was never abusive to Amber on even one occasion, think about the message that Mr. Depp and his attorneys are sending to Amber, and by extension to every victim of domestic abuse everywhere. If you didn't take pictures, it didn't happen. If you did take pictures, they're fake. If you didn't tell your friends, you're lying. And if you did tell your friends, they're part of the hoax. If you didn't seek medical treatment, you weren't injured. If you did seek medical treatment, you're crazy. If you do everything that you can to help your spouse, the person that you love, rid himself of the crushing drug and alcohol abuse that spins him into an abusive, rage-filled monster, you're a nag. And if you finally decide that enough is enough, you've had enough of the fear, enough of the pain, and you have to leave to save yourself, you're a gold digger. That is the message that Mr. Depp is asking you to send. But he doesn't stop there, because in Mr. Depp's world, you don't leave Mr. Depp. And if you do, he will start a campaign of global humiliation against you, a smear campaign that lasts to this very day. He will do everything he can to destroy your life, to destroy your career. That is what they're saying, ladies and gentlemen. And that's what they're trying to get you, the jury, to be an accomplice to. But it's not surprising, because Mr. Depp cannot and will not take responsibility for his own actions. It's always someone else's fault. Just as Ms. Vasquez did and Mr. Chu did, I would like to extend my thanks to you on behalf of Amber and our whole legal team for the care and the diligence with which you have served as jurors in this matter. You've paid attention to every witness, every piece of evidence, and I can't even imagine the sacrifice that you've made in terms of time away from your friends, your family, your job, to be here on this jury. It's a very important role that you're serving, and we thank you very much. Let's pick up where we started 6 weeks ago in opening statement. You may remember that I asked you to keep a simple question in mind, which is, why are you here? And much of what you've heard during the course of this trial, you don't need to make a decision on in order to return a verdict for Ms. Heard on Mr. Depp's claim of defamation. Now, we'll talk about Ms. Heard's claim of defamation against Mr. Depp, and Elaine will address most of that in a few minutes. But your key question to answer is, does the First Amendment give Ms. Heard the right to write the words that she wrote in this article on December 18th, 2018? That's the question. And you cannot simultaneously protect and uphold the First Amendment and find in favor of Johnny Depp on his claim. You simply cannot. You have to decide, should someone be able to write an article like that in the United States of America without being sued successfully, without having to go through the hell that Ms. Heard has gone through? Have to decide. So let's talk about that. And to do that, we get to explain a bit more about the law that you have to follow. Without successful. This is the op-ed piece. I'm not going to read it to you again. You heard me read it to you in opening statements. And I would urge you, when you're in the deliberation room, read it. Read it again. And I know we focused on it, here and there over the course of the trial, but the vast majority of this trial has not focused on these words, on this piece. This is obviously the paper edition. There's the online edition as well. Now we get a chance to discuss with you exactly what you have to find about this article. Let's try this again. This is one of the jury instructions that you'll get. And I've been so looking forward to being able to actually explain to you, as the judge read all the instructions to you this morning, and I know it was a lot, but we've been looking forward to being able to explain to you what you're here to decide. Because I imagine for some of the case, it's been kind of unclear. What are you being asked to decide? These are the things that you have to find, and you have to answer yes. As Mr. Chu said, you have to answer yes to all of them in order to find in favor of Mr. Depp. So you have to find that the statement was about Mr. Depp. And you can decide that in the context of the article. And I'll get to the arguments that Mr. Depp raises on that in a minute. You also have to find that the statement is false. And we're going to look at the statements here. We're going to look at each of the three statements. And in order to win his claim, Mr. Depp has to prove every single element. And there's a concept in the jury instructions that you really didn't hear from Mr. Depp's side this morning, but you've all heard it, I'm sure, outside the courtroom, which is burden of proof. It is Mr. Depp's burden to prove each and every one of these elements. If he cannot, Ms. Heard wins. If he cannot prove each and every one of these elements under the burden of proof that's applicable, Ms. Heard wins. And there's two different burdens of proof that we'll get to. For all of them except number 7, the burden of proof is greater weight of the evidence. So you weigh the evidence and you decide, has Mr. Depp proven to you the first 6 elements? The 7th one, for actual malice, the clear and convincing evidence standard, we'll get to in a few minutes. But this is what he has to prove. And he cannot do that. These are the 3 statements. And I know you may be thinking to yourself, wait a second, don't we have to decide if Mr. Depp committed abuse? And the answer is no, you don't have to. Because these 3 statements, you can decide as a matter of law, or as a matter of fact, as you weigh the evidence and the fact that they're true. So the first 2 statements I'm going to address together. Then, 2 years ago, I became a public figure representing domestic abuse, and I felt the full force of our culture's wrath for women who speak out. Number 2, I had the rare vantage point of seeing in real time how institutions protect men accused of abuse. When you go back to the jury room to deliberate, you should feel free, like I said, to read the article and think of the article's purpose. The jury instructions also tell you to take these statements in the context of the article. Think about the purpose. The purpose of the article was to promote legislative measures designed to protect victims of domestic abuse, designed to protect people who did exactly what Ms. Heard did, to speak out. That's apparent on the face of the article. And to do that, Ms. Heard talked about her own life experiences as someone who had obtained a TRO against Mr. Depp, someone who had accused Mr. Depp of domestic violence. Make no mistake, and Mr. Depp's side keeps trying to say that we're somehow suggesting that 2 years before she wrote this, that Ms. Heard hadn't had anything to do with Mr. Depp. We're not saying that. You heard Ms. Heard herself say, of course, 2 years before I wrote this article, I felt the full force of our culture's wrath for women who speak out after she obtained a temporary restraining order against Mr. Depp, after she became a public figure representing domestic abuse. But the words that she wrote here, and then chronicling her own experience after that, those words are true. Those words are true. Similarly, the rare vantage point of seeing, based on her own experiences post May 27th, 2016, how institutions protect men accused of abuse, those words are true, and the First Amendment protects Ms. Heard's right to say them. Now, the third statement is absolutely true as well, but we're going to take that separately because she didn't write it. Under the First Amendment, the statements have to be false in order for Mr. Depp to win. Now, plaintiff addresses, like I said, an argument that we're not making. And as I said, we're not running from the fact that when she discussed becoming a public figure representing domestic abuse, Amber was speaking of her experiences reporting domestic abuse against Johnny Depp. She admitted to that, but that doesn't make the article or the statements about Johnny Depp. Think about it. Think about every piece of evidence that you've heard over the last 6 weeks about his abuse, about their relationship. None of that is in the article. None of it. We all know that it would be a very different article if she had written about what she suffered, that she's told you about over the last 6 weeks. Because he knows the words are true, Mr. Depp says that the words now have a defamatory implication. He says the statements are the same as saying, Johnny Depp abused me. But just because he wants to make the article about himself doesn't mean it is. He has to show you that any defamatory implication was designed and intended. Look at number 4. Designed and intended by Ms. Heard to convey the defamatory meaning that he suggests. Just because people might read the article and remember, oh yeah, Amber Heard used to be married to Johnny Depp and she accused him of abuse, that doesn't mean that she designed and intended defamatory implications in writing about herself. And think about it. If Mr. Depp is right, then virtually any statement that anyone could ever make about their own life that implies anything, implies any involvement with any other person, could be defamatory. And that's clearly not what the First Amendment intends. She didn't design and intend the words to be the equivalent of writing Johnny Depp abused me. And you don't have to take her words for it. You can take the words of Terrence Doherty of the ACLU. He said that the op-ed wasn't even Ms. Heard's idea. The ACLU wrote the first draft, and great care was taken in drafting the article so as not to make it about Mr. Depp or Ms. Heard's relationship with him. That's the only evidence presented about Ms. Heard's motive, except her statements that that was exactly what she wanted to do. She wanted to talk about her experiences after Johnny Depp. She wanted to own her story after Johnny Depp and fit those into what other women experience, what other people experience, having accused someone of domestic abuse and the backlash that they suffer, and then talk about legislative measures that could help protect people in those positions. That's what she meant, and that's what the article is about. There's no hidden meaning here, ladies and gentlemen. This isn't a hit piece on Johnny Depp. This isn't a hit piece on Johnny Depp. And you can end here. You can end there by saying the statements that she wrote were not false, and the First Amendment protects them. Let's talk about the headline for a minute. The headline that was published in the online version only of the article on December 18th, 2018, said, "I spoke up against sexual violence and faced our culture's wrath." A few points here. Number one, and this evidence is undisputed. There's no dispute about this. So as you weigh the evidence, you don't have to check your common sense at the door, and you can weigh circumstantial evidence, you can weigh facts, but you can't see evidence where no evidence exists. And the undisputed evidence here is that Ms. Heard didn't write the headline. She didn't approve the headline. She had nothing to do with it. She was not given notice of the headline. She testified, you saw her testify about the sexual assault that she experienced at the hands of Mr. Depp. You saw her testify about that they're calling her a liar. You saw her on the stand testify with your own mouth, with her own mouth, exactly what she went through for the first time in court, because people who have suffered that, they don't want to broadcast that to the world. They want to penalize Ms. Heard for not speaking about that earlier. That's ridiculous, and it's insulting, and it's just victim blaming at its most disgusting. The only reference to sexual assault in the article, and you can read the op-ed, is sexual assault that she said she had experienced by the time she was of college age, before Mr. Depp. So there is a reference to sexual violence in that article, but it's not by Mr. Depp. And Mr. Depp can't hold her liable for a headline she didn't write, that contained something that had nothing, that was not about him. And they want you to think that she republished the headline by tweeting out the link to the online version. So let's look at this. This is the tweet that she sent on December 19th. The hyperlink says, "Opinion Amber Heard, I spoke up against sexual violence." That's the online version of the article. As Ms. Heard said, you can't tweet a piece of paper. So when she wanted to share that she had written this article, what choice does she have? She has to attach that link. And the jury instructions that you have make clear that a hyperlink is not republication. Forwarding a link on does not mean that you broadcast the statement again, but that's what they want to make you think. The only way, and the jury instructions that you have, and we don't need to read through them in detail now, but the republication instruction says that merely linking to an article does not amount to republication, but adding content to a linked article may constitute republication. You must determine whether any added content was intended to reach a new audience, and if you find any content added to the hyperlink was intended to reach a new audience, it constitutes a republication. There was no content added to the article. She tweeted above the article simply saying, "Today I published this." That's what she said. She didn't add any content to it. She could have added some of the content that you've heard in this courtroom to it. She could have said, not only did 2 years ago I become a public figure representing domestic abuse, but let me tell you about the domestic abuse that I suffered. That would be adding new content. This is not adding new content. But I guess it's no surprise, because this whole case is about blaming Amber Heard for things she didn't do. But that's what Mr. Depp does. It's what he's always done. Blame other people, refuse to take accountability. But the problem for him here is that he's running headlong into the United States Constitution, which says that you cannot hold Amber Heard liable for words she didn't write or publish. But here we are. Here we are. And you can decide this case without ever wading into any of the allegations, the facts, the evidence that you've heard about the heinous abuse that Ms. Heard suffered at the hands of Mr. Depp. You can decide that by determining that those statements are true and that they're protected by the First Amendment. But Mr. Depp brought this case, and he's suggesting that he was never abusive to Ms. Heard. So if that's where you want to make your decision, that's where the road ends for Mr. Depp. Ladies and gentlemen, let me be very clear. If Amber was abused by Mr. Depp even one time, then she wins. One time. And we're not just talking about physical abuse. We're talking about emotional abuse, psychological abuse, financial abuse, sexual abuse. That's what we're talking about. Let's look at the evidence. You heard Mr. Depp define abuse from his own mouth. He admitted all of that when he talked about his childhood. As they referenced, his mother called him one-eye because he had a lazy eye. And he said that that was worse than the beatings that he took. Worse than the beatings that he took. Being called one-eye by his mother was worse than the beatings that he took. And after the evidence that you've seen, some of which you're going to see, I want you to think to yourself, is being called one-eye worse than what he did to Miss Heard? Absolutely not. You'll remember his expert, Shannon Curry, agreed with all that abuse can take many forms. And you'll remember that Don Hughes, Miss Heard's expert, talked about the reports of intimate partner violence by Miss Heard, characterized by physical violence, psychological aggression, sexual violence, coercive control, and surveillance behaviors. She tested Miss Heard. She said that the tests show that there's a high degree of serious violence perpetrated by Mr. Depp toward Miss Heard. She got that opinion and that impression by reviewing the medical records of Miss Heard. She talked about the role of coercive control that Mr. Depp exercised over Miss Heard. The effect of coercive control, she said, was drastic, and it was composed of things such as possessive jealousy, the imbalance of power, not only in physical stature and physical size, but in where they were in their life and their career. By intimidation. She said writing obscene messages to your partner can absolutely be intimidating behavior. She said that Mr. Depp, after reviewing the evidence, banging and throwing and hitting things in the household, that's psychological aggression. Punching a wall, throwing something, screaming, that is abuse. That's abuse, ladies and gentlemen. She said alcohol can just throw lighter fluid off a flame in a situation of domestic violence. All of these things constitute the domestic violence that Miss Heard suffered at the hands of Mr. Depp. And he's trying to get you, to fool you, to believing that he's carried his burden of proof that never a single time in their relationship was he in any way, physically or non-physically, abusive to Miss Heard. And that's ridiculous. That's ridiculous. So let's look at some of that evidence. And like I said, you can apply your own common sense. You don't need to check that at the door when you go into the deliberation room. I'm going to walk you through the evidence, some of the evidence that's been presented, including evidence from Mr. Depp's own mouth, his own words or the words of his witnesses. Keep in mind the burden of proof. And as we go through this evidence, I'd ask you to keep this in mind as well. It's not about who's the better spouse. It's not about whether you think Miss Heard may have been abusive to Mr. Depp. It's not. Because remember, if you think that they were both abusive to each other, and that's what their witness Laurel Anderson testified to, then Amber wins. They're trying to trick you into thinking that Amber has to be perfect in order to win, even while they're ignoring Mr. Depp's many flaws. But don't fall for that trick. Amber's not perfect. None of us are. She's never pretended to be, and that's not what you're being asked to decide. One time, ladies and gentlemen, one time.